On a quiet morning at Helios Station, Lena Ortiz sat at her usual console, sipping a cup of lukewarm coffee and watching the endless stretch of stars outside the observation window. The station hovered silently in orbit around a small, unremarkable star. Far from the bustling trade routes and political centers of the galaxy, it was the kind of place where time seemed to stretch and bend, where days passed slowly, punctuated only by routine scans and the occasional blip of distant cosmic activity. Lena had grown used to this calm. She had spent almost a decade at Helios, watching signals bounce across the void, recording data about asteroid movements, planetary atmospheres, and the faint hums of distant civilizations. Most days were uneventful, predictable, almost boring, but every so often, something extraordinary happened, a signal that would send ripples across the galaxy. And today, Lena sensed that this was one of those rare days. Her fingers danced over the console, adjusting frequencies, enhancing signal clarity. She squinted at the readings, feeling a strange tension in her chest. At first it looked like interference, a jumble of cosmic static, solar flares, or malfunctioning equipment. But as she tuned the receiver more precisely, the static began to form patterns, small clusters of signals repeating in intervals, almost like a language. Lena's heart skipped a beat. It was unlike anything she had seen before. Her mind raced as she considered possibilities. Could it be a new form of natural cosmic phenomenon? Perhaps a strange type of pulsar or an anomaly in a space-time fabric? But no, the rhythm was too deliberate, too structured. It was artificial. Someone or something was trying to communicate. She quickly activated the station's translation software, running the signal through layers of decryption algorithms. The program beeped in Word, analyzing patterns and attempting to match them with known languages or codes. Lena watched, her hands trembling slightly, as the software struggled to make sense of the input. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours, until the translation finally produced something that made her freeze. The unmistakable pattern of a distress call, SOS. Someone, somewhere, was in danger and calling for help. Her eyes widened as the meaning sank in. This was not a routine anomaly or a routine signal. This was urgent. This was life and death. Lena immediately contacted her supervisor. Dr. Rail, you need to see this, she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline rushing through her veins. On the other end, Dr. Rail appeared on the holoscreen, his face a mixture of curiosity and concern. He leaned closer as Lena shared the readings, pointing at the fluctuating patterns and repeating sequences. This is remarkable, he whispered, almost to himself. It's a real SOS, and it's coming from a planet classified as a Deathworld. The word Deathworld sent a shiver down Lena's spine. Deathworlds were notorious across the galaxy, planets with harsh, almost impossible conditions for life. The atmosphere was toxic, the weather deadly, and the terrain often covered in jagged rock, molten lava, or poisonous swamps. Any species that survived there had to be incredibly resilient and defensive. Most outsiders avoided these worlds entirely. Few had ever landed safely, and even fewer had returned to tell the tale. That a Deathworld was sending an SOS was both alarming and mysterious. Why would a species that had survived for centuries in such a brutal environment seek help? And from whom? Word of the signal spread quickly through Helios Station. The staff buzzed with a mixture of excitement and fear. Some were skeptical, suggesting it could be a hoax, a misread natural phenomenon, or even a malfunction in the station's equipment. Others were intrigued, seeing the possibility of first contact with a previously isolated civilization. The debates were heated. Lena could feel the tension building as she tried to stay focused, analyzing the data and confirming the signal's authenticity. Every new reading confirmed the terrifying truth. The signal was real, and it was urgent. As scientists worked frantically, the SOS revealed more details. It wasn't just a simple call for help. The patterns suggested multiple transmissions from different locations on the planet. Something was happening on a massive scale. Entire regions were in distress, perhaps even the entire population. Lena imagined the planet below. Alien landscapes, sharp mountains or endless deserts, with life forms struggling to survive against overwhelming odds. For the first time in years, Lena felt a rush of adrenaline mixed with fear. This was no simulation, no training exercise. This was real. Lives depended on the actions she and the station took in the coming hours. Meanwhile, political observers back on the Galactic Council began taking notice. Deathworlds were not just hostile environments. They were also home to some of the most fiercely independent and aggressive species in the galaxy. Any interaction with them could be dangerous. Sending aid could be interpreted as an act of diplomacy, but it could just as easily provoke hostility. Yet ignoring the SOS was unthinkable. Lena and her colleagues realized that the decision to respond or not would have consequences far beyond Helios Station. As the day wore on, Lena couldn't help but think about the inhabitants of the Deathworld. What had forced them to send this SOS? Were they facing a natural disaster, like a massive storm or volcanic eruption? Or were they under attack from another species? The signals didn't clarify the source of danger, only that it was urgent and widespread. Lena felt a strange connection to these distant beings she had never met. She imagined them watching the skies, hoping someone would answer. By evening, Helios Station had organized a task force to analyze the SOS and plan a potential response. Lena worked alongside linguists, strategists, and communications specialists, trying to decode every nuance of the transmissions. Each new piece of data hinted at a complex society, one that had developed unique technology and survival strategies to endure their harsh planet. They were not helpless, they were desperate, and that desperation made them human in a way, even if they weren't human at all. The station's AI, a sophisticated system designed to assist in emergencies, suggested several potential strategies. Some were purely observational: monitor the planet from orbit, collect more data, and attempt to predict the next transmissions. Others were more proactive: send a small reconnaissance team or even prepare a rescue mission. Lena reviewed each proposal carefully, weighing the risks against the urgency of the situation. Every option carried dangers, but doing nothing was not acceptable. Late into the night, as Lena returned to the observation deck to watch the starfield, the SOS repeated again, louder this time. It pulsed across the communication channels like a heartbeat, insistent, pleading. Lena felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. Somewhere out there, life teetered on the edge, waiting for a response, and it was now clear Helios Station could not remain a passive observer. That night, as the station's lights dimmed and most of the crew rested, Lena stayed by her console, running simulations and decoding the latest transmissions. She imagined the death world below. It surfaced alien and terrifying, yet inhabited by beings who had, against all odds, reached out for help. For the first time in her career, Lena understood that the vastness of space wasn't just a backdrop for exploration. It was a place where life fought to endure, where courage and desperation intersected across light. And at that moment, Lena Ortiz realized that the events unfolding on her monitors would change the course of her life and, perhaps, the galaxy forever. As soon as the SOS from the Death World became undeniable, word reached the Galactic Council, a group that governed interstellar relations and oversaw critical decisions across the galaxy. The council chambers, usually reserved for diplomatic debates and economic discussions, were thrown into chaos. Holoscreens flickered with the images and data transmitted from Helios Station, while advisors, generals, and scientists crowded around to analyze the situation. The news was unprecedented. An SOS from a death world had never been confirmed before. Most council members had only heard stories of such planets hostile, dangerous, and fiercely independent. But now, evidence showed that an entire civilization, a species that had survived countless hardships, was in desperate need of help. The council members were divided almost immediately. Some argued that it could be a trap. Deathworlders were legendary not just for their harsh environment but for their cunning and military strength. They had survived because they trusted no outsiders. It was possible that the SOS was a lure, a test to see how the rest of the galaxy would respond. These members warned against sending a fleet. They suggested monitoring the planet remotely, gathering more intelligence, and preparing defenses in case it turned hostile. The chamber buzzed with cautionary arguments, each more cautious than the last. Other members felt differently. They emphasized the moral responsibility to respond. "We cannot ignore a plea for help," said one diplomat, her voice steady but passionate. "If this SOS is real, if lives are truly at stake, then we have no choice. We must act. We must send aid." Her words echoed across the chamber, striking some as naive but inspiring others. The debate grew heated, voices overlapping as fear and duty clashed. No one had ever dealt with a situation quite like this. Meanwhile, scientists and strategists presented detailed reports. Helios Station had sent live data showing the structure of the SOS, the frequency patterns, and the potential scope of the disaster. Preliminary analysis suggested that the Death World was facing a massive environmental crisis. The exact cause was still unknown. Could it be a volcanic eruption, a collapsing ecosystem, or something more unusual? The scientists emphasized the urgency, explaining that even a small delay could result in the loss of countless lives. Maps and 3D projections of the planet were displayed on the council's holotable, showing jagged mountains, vast deserts, and regions of extreme heat. The images were striking and intimidating. The generals were worried. Deathworlders were not just survivors, they were warriors by nature. Their defensive capabilities were among the most advanced in the galaxy. Any fleet that entered their space risked immediate confrontation. Several military advisors argued that a full-force fleet should be deployed, but prepared for conflict. They suggested armadas of ships, shield generators, and weapons on standby. Some even proposed that the fleet should arrive disguised as a neutral scientific mission, but fully armed in case diplomacy failed. The tension between caution and urgency was palpable. At the center of the debate sat the council's chairperson, a wise elder named Rallick Thorne. He listened carefully to every argument, weighing moral responsibility against political and military risk. His eyes scanned the holoscreens showing Helios Station's data. He could see the desperation in the SOS pattern, the repetitive and urgent signals that seemed almost human in their pleading. Rallick understood that while the Deathworlders were dangerous, they were also intelligent. and this plea for help was a rare, extraordinary signal. It demanded a response. After hours of deliberation, Raleigh made the decision. The Council would authorize a full-force fleet to respond to the SOS. Diplomacy would be the first approach, but the fleet had to be prepared for any scenario, including hostile action. The decision was risky, but it was the only way to ensure that lives could be saved and that the situation did not spiral out of control. Orders were sent immediately. Fleets were mobilized, supplies were prepared, and communication lines were established with Helios Station to coordinate the mission. As news of the Council's decision reached Helios Station, Lina Ortiz felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. The station would play a critical role in guiding the fleet and providing real-time information about the Deathworld's conditions. Every signal, every pattern, every pass of data would be analyzed to ensure the fleet's approach was safe. Lina spent long hours working with the Council's strategic team, plotting courses, analyzing orbital paths, and identifying potential hazards. Each calculation had to be precise. A single error could lead to disaster, not just for the fleet but for the people they were trying to save. Meanwhile, the fleet itself began assembling at the nearest stop. Massive ships, bristling with engines and equipped with both defensive and rescue technology, gathered in formation. Crew members trained tirelessly, running simulations of potential scenarios, hostile encounters, natural disasters, and emergency evacuations. Each pilot, engineer, and officer knew that this mission was unprecedented. No one had ever attempted a coordinated rescue on a planet known for extreme conditions and unpredictable life forms. The tension was palpable, but so was determination. The Council also debated the fleet's composition. Some advisors insisted on including scientific specialists to understand the environmental crisis, while others emphasized military strength to deter aggression. Eventually, a compromise was reached. The fleet would carry both armed ships for protection and scientific teams for analysis and rescue. This dual approach reflected the Council's hope that diplomacy would succeed, but readiness for conflict remained a priority as preparations continued. Lina watched transmissions from Helios Station closely. The SOS from the Deathworld persisted, a constant reminder of the stakes. It was almost hypnotic, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to echo across the station's halls. The signals hinted at multiple affected regions on the planet, suggesting widespread devastation. Lina imagined the alien cities or settlements, the inhabitants struggling to survive against overwhelming odds. She felt a deep sense of responsibility, knowing that her work could directly influence whether the fleet succeeded or failed. Outside the Council chambers, political tensions began to rise. Neighboring systems watched closely, concerned about the risks and implications of sending a fleet to a death. Some feared that engaging with such a dangerous planet could spark conflict or give one system undue influence over another. Rumors swirled about the fleet's intentions, with speculation ranging from humanitarian aid to covert military operations. Amid the uncertainty, the Council remained focused. United by the extraordinary nature of the SOS for the fleet commanders, the mission was both thrilling and terrifying. Commander Tarek Voss, appointed to lead the operation, reviewed every available detail. He studied the planetary scans, the SOS patterns, and intelligence reports about Deathworlder society. He knew the planet's inhabitants were highly intelligent, fiercely protective of their territory, and capable of advanced defense strategies. Yet he also recognized their vulnerability in the face of the current crisis. Tarek understood that this mission required a balance of diplomacy, caution, and decisiveness. Failure could mean not only loss of life on the planet, but also political consequences across the galaxy as the fleet readied itself. Training simulations became more realistic. Pilots practiced navigating treacherous atmospheric conditions. Engineers ran drills for rapid deployment of rescue equipment, and communication teams rehearsed scenarios for first contact. Every crew member felt the weight of history on their shoulders. They were not merely responding to a routine distress call. They were entering uncharted territory, stepping into a situation that could define interstellar relations for generations. At Helios Station, Lina coordinated closely with Commander Voss and his team, providing continuous updates on the SOS and environmental data. Each signal received from the Deathworld was carefully analyzed to detect changes in intensity, frequency, and origin. Lina began noticing subtle shifts in the pattern that hinted at escalating danger. She relayed her findings urgently to the fleet command, emphasizing that time was critical. The sense of urgency grew with every passing hour as the fleet prepared for departure. The entire council held a final briefing. The risks were reiterated, strategies were reviewed, and contingency plans were outlined. Everyone understood that this mission was unlike any other, a delicate balance between diplomacy and survival. And while uncertainty hung over every decision, hope and determination were equally strong. The SOS from the Deathworld had awakened the galaxy to the fragility and resilience of life, and the coming mission would be a test of courage, strategy, and unity. By the time the fleet was ready to depart, the SOS had become almost relentless, a constant pulse echoing across Helios Station's communication systems. Lina Ortiz and her colleagues watched as massive ships began leaving the starport, engines glowing, shields humming, and crews bracing for what lay ahead. For Lena, it was both terrifying and exhilarating. The path forward was uncertain, the danger immense, but one thing was clear: the Deathworlders had reached out for help, and now the galaxy was answering. The fleet moved through space like a living, humming organism, massive ships cutting through the darkness with precision. Commander Tarek Voss stood on the bridge of the flagship Aegis, his eyes scanning the endless expanse of stars. The engines hummed beneath his feet, a constant reminder of the power at their disposal and the responsibility that weighed on every crew member. This was no ordinary mission. The SOS from the Deathworld had drawn them into a scenario unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Every person on board knew that failure was not an option. Thousands of lives, both alien and human, depended on their success. From the moment they left the starport, the journey proved more challenging than anyone had anticipated. Space, though vast and mostly empty, was not without danger. Meteor showers streaked unpredictably across their path, sending sparks and radiation pulses across the fleet's shields. The navigation officers worked tirelessly, calculating new trajectories to avoid the denser clusters of debris, often altering course multiple times in minutes. Even a single miscalculation could result in catastrophic damage to the fleet, and Commander Voss made sure no risk was taken lightly. The tension on the bridge was palpable, but no one allowed panic to take over. Inside the ships, the crew adjusted to life under constant alert. Pilots trained for emergency maneuvers, engineers monitored engines for any sign of overheating or malfunction, and communications teams ensured continuous contact with Helios Station. Lena Ortiz, though far behind in orbit, was in constant communication with the fleet. Every pulse of the SOS was analyzed, every change in the signal relayed immediately. Her fingers flew over the console as she calculated possible scenarios, trying to anticipate what the fleet might encounter on the Deathworld's surface. Every day felt like an eternity, every minute counting against the looming disaster. As they traveled further, the challenges grew more unpredictable. The fleet entered a region of space known for gravitational anomalies. Stars bent light in strange ways, creating optical illusions that made navigation difficult. Sensors sometimes registered false readings, suggesting the presence of asteroids or ships that weren't actually there. Pilots reported sudden fluctuations in engine performance, and engineers scrambled to correct the minor malfunctions before they escalated. Commander Voss remained calm, giving orders with precision. His voice was steady, instilling confidence even when the unknown pressed close against them. Despite the technological marvels aboard the fleet, human error remained a constant threat. Fatigue set in quickly as the crew worked around the clock, analyzing data and maintaining the ships. Sleep was rationed, meals were simplified, and moments of relaxation were few. Yet even under these conditions, camaraderie and determination kept morale high. Crewmates shared quiet conversations about home, about families they might never see again, and about the stakes of the mission. It was a reminder that, beyond strategy and technology, it was human courage that would ultimately decide the outcome. As the fleet approached the outer edge of the Deathworld system, new dangers emerged. The planet's gravity was stronger than predicted, creating turbulence that threatened to pull ships off course. Massive storms raged in orbit, sending charged particles and intense radiation towards them. Sensors detected shifting magnetic fields, causing interference in communication and navigation systems. Commander Voss ordered shields to maximum, engines to full output, and every crew member to their stations. It was a delicate dance of survival, with each decision potentially affecting hundreds of lives on board. Meanwhile, Lena Ortiz monitored the SOS signals closely. The intensity had increased as the fleet drew closer, suggesting that whatever was happening on the planet was escalating. She noticed small, irregular fluctuations that hinted at environmental instability, perhaps seismic activity, volcanic eruptions, or massive storms. She relayed her findings urgently to Commander Voss, emphasizing that every move must be calculated to avoid exacerbating the disaster. "Time is critical," she said over the secure channel. "We cannot afford mistakes, not here, not now." The tension wasn't only physical but also psychological. Crew members were constantly reminded that they were entering a world hostile to almost all forms of life. The Deathworlders, the planet's inhabitants, were rumored to be both intelligent and highly defensive. There was no guarantee that the fleet would be welcomed or even survived if first contact went poorly. Training simulations had prepared them for some possibilities, but nothing could fully prepare anyone for the reality of the unknown. Anxiety mixed with determination, creating an atmosphere of sharp focus aboard every ship. As the fleet neared the planet, Commander Voss called a final briefing with his senior officers. "We are approaching the point of no return," he said. "From here on, every decision matters. We will maintain maximum communication with Helios Station, but our sensors may be limited once we enter orbit. Be ready for sudden environmental hazards, possible hostile contact, and rapid deployment scenarios. Remember, our priority is survival and rescue. Nothing else comes first." His words, calm but firm, resonated throughout the bridge. The officers nodded, absorbing the gravity of their mission. despite the dangers. Moments of awe occasionally punctuated the tension. The Deathworld, from a distance, was a planet of striking contrasts. Jagged mountain ranges glowed with molten veins of rock. Massive storm systems churned across its surface, and unusual flashes of light hinted at strange energy phenomena. The planet was both beautiful and deadly, a living reminder of the challenges the inhabitants had faced for centuries. Crew members watched in silent wonder, a brief respite from the constant strain of navigation and preparation. As they entered orbit, the fleet encountered the first clear sign of the Deathworlders' defensive capabilities. Energy pulses shot across the void, powerful but controlled, signaling a warning to the fleet. It was the first contact, not yet physical, but enough to show that the inhabitants were alert, aware, and ready to defend their world. Commander Voss signaled back carefully, using protocols designed to show not. The tension was nearly unbearable, each second stretching as both sides assessed the other. Any mistake could escalate into conflict. Lena watched the unfolding scene with a mixture of fascination and worry. The SOS, now stronger than ever, seemed to plead for faster action. It was clear that whatever danger threatened the planet was imminent. She monitored fluctuations in the signal, noting changes that hinted at rising environmental instability and potential threats to both the inhabitants and the fleet. She relayed her analysis continuously, ensuring that the fleet could make informed decisions in real time. Despite these pressures, the crew continued to perform with remarkable skill. Pilots maneuvered massive ships through the planet's turbulent upper atmosphere. Engineers maintained engine output while compensating for magnetic interference, and communications teams ensured that heliostation remained linked with every vessel. Every task required precision, every decision carried weight, and every member of the crew understood the stakes. The closer the fleet came to the Deathworld, the more urgent the situation became. The SOS signals indicated multiple areas of crisis, spreading across the planet like ripples in water. Commander Voss realized that the rescue operation would not be simple. They would have to coordinate landings, deploy resources strategically, and interact with the Deathworlders in a way that built trust rather than fear. The complexity of the mission weighed heavily on him, but he remained focused, relying on both training and instinct. Finally, after days of careful navigation, the fleet reached a position where they could begin planning surface operations. Commander Voss and Lena Ortiz reviewed the latest data, noting the most critical regions and potential landing zones. Environmental hazards remained a constant concern, but they had to act quickly. The SOS had grown almost desperate, a rhythm of urgency that could not be ignored. It was a race against time, with both natural and potentially hostile challenges ahead. As they prepared to descend, the fleet in heliostation worked as one. Every piece of information, every pulse from the SOS, every anomaly detected by sensors was shared and analyzed. The crew knew that success depended on coordination, trust, and courage. The stakes were immense, but so was the opportunity to save lives, to establish first contact with a civilization that had never sought help before, and to prove that even in the most dangerous corners of the galaxy, cooperation and determination could overcome fear. And so, as the fleet prepared to enter the planet's upper atmosphere, every crew member felt the mixture of fear, excitement, and responsibility that comes with facing the unknown. The SOS from the Deathworld had drawn them into a situation unlike any other, a challenge that tested both skill and heart. Commander Voss took one last deep breath, gazing out at the planet below. The journey had been perilous, the obstacles immense, but they were ready. Whatever awaited them on the surface, they would face it together because lives hung in the balance, and the call for help could not go unanswered. The moment the fleet descended into the upper atmosphere of the Deathworld, the true scale of the planet's danger became clear. Violent storms raged across jagged mountain ranges. Electrical storms lit the skies in blinding flashes, and massive winds howled across barren plains. Visibility was minimal. The fleet's sensors picked up chaotic shifts in air pressure and temperature. Commander Tarek Voss gripped the edge of the command console, his eyes fixed on the readouts. Every second mattered. One miscalculation could send ships crashing into the planet or leave entire regions of the fleet vulnerable to environmental hazards. The tension was thick, almost suffocating, but the crew pressed on, trained and determined to face whatever lay ahead. At first they saw nothing but barren rock and violent weather. It was easy to imagine the Deathworld as an uninhabited wasteland, a place where survival would be impossible. Then, subtle signs of life began to emerge. Massive structures rose from the ground, unlike any human architecture, with shapes that seemed organic and functional at the same time. Lights flickered in patterns, evidence of technology and civilization. The Deathworlders were not only surviving, they had built cities, fortresses, and settlements adapted to the extreme environment. Lena Ortiz monitored the SOS signals closely, noting that the intensity was highest near these structures. These were the regions in most immediate danger, where lives could be lost if the fleet delayed. As the fleet approached the largest settlement, the first true interaction with the Deathworlders occurred. From the surface, energy pulses shot up toward the fleet, bright and powerful, creating a dramatic, almost theatrical warning. Shields activated instinctively on the fleet's ships, humming as they absorbed the intense energy bursts. Crew members tensed, unsure whether these were attacks or simply a display of the Deathworlders' defensive capabilities. Commander Voss remained calm, signaling the fleet to hold position and respond carefully. "This is our first contact," he said quietly to his officers. "Do not provoke them. Show restraint, but be ready for anything." The fleet's communications team sent standard non-aggression signals, transmitting messages encoded in frequencies designed to match the Deathworlders' signal patterns. Moments stretched into hours as both sides watched and waited. The planet below seemed almost alive, as if studying the newcomers with curiosity and caution. Lina Ortiz analyzed the SOS alongside the real-time environmental data, identifying areas where immediate rescue operations were necessary. Her voice over the comm system was steady but urgent. "Commander, the highest signal intensity is concentrated here," she said, pointing to a region near a deep canyon where the SOS pulse was almost continuous. "Whatever is happening, they need help now. That's where we should focus first." Finally, a breakthrough occurred. Small, agile craft emerged from the settlement, hovering at a safe distance. They were unlike anything the fleet had seen before, sleek armored, with energy shields visible around their structure. The craft moved deliberately, maintaining a defensive posture but not attacking. It was the first visual confirmation that the Deathworlders were intelligent, organized, and willing to engage cautiously. Commander Voss ordered the fleet to reduce speed, sending signals of reassurance while keeping weapons systems in standby mode. Every gesture was carefully measured to avoid triggering hostility. The initial moments of first contact were tense and silent. The fleet's crew watched through observation ports, cameras and sensors, studying the movements of the alien craft. Lina Ortiz monitored the SOS signals with renewed intensity. The distress pulse continued, now accompanied by subtle modulations that suggested communication attempts. The Deathworlders were responding in real time, attempting to coordinate with the fleet despite the barrier of distance, technology, and language. It was a delicate dance, requiring patience, intelligence, and trust. The first attempts at direct communication were cautious. The fleet transmitted sequences of light, sound, and energy patterns designed to show peaceful intent. Slowly, the Deathworlders mirrored these signals, sending back variations that suggested understanding. It was not conversation in the human sense, but it was interaction. Both sides were testing the waters, exploring each other's intentions without committing to aggressive actions. Crew members held their breath as the back and forth continued, realizing that a single misstep could escalate into conflict. After hours of cautious signaling, the Deathworlders made the next move. A small delegation of their species descended to a neutral area, carefully chosen to avoid direct contact with the fleet's weapons or landing zones. They were imposing in appearance, though armored and physically adapted to their harsh environments, but their movements were deliberate and unthreatening. Commander Voss instructed the fleet to remain in formation, engines on standby, shields active but not. He personally addressed the delegation through the fleet's communication system, using a combination of energy pulse translations and visual symbols. That it was an extraordinary moment. Here were beings who had never sought help before, beings who had survived unimaginable conditions, taking a risk by approaching outsiders. The atmosphere was charged with tension, but also with hope. Lina Ortiz, monitoring every signal, could sense the breakthrough. The Deathworlders were beginning to trust them, just enough to allow the possibility of cooperation. It was a moment that could determine the fate of thousands of lives on the planet. Negotiations were slow but steady. The Deathworlders' communication system was complex, relying on sequences of pulses, light, and subtle vibrations that took time to interpret. Linguists aboard the fleet worked tirelessly alongside Lina, decoding the patterns and translating intentions. It became clear that the SOS was genuine. The planet was facing catastrophic environmental collapse. Volcanic activity, storms, and seismic shifts were threatening entire settlements. The Deathworlders, despite their strength and technology, could not prevent the disaster on their own. The SOS had been a desperate plea, and now, finally, the fleet was positioned to respond. Trust remained fragile. The Deathworlders were cautious, observing every movement of the fleet. Commander Voss understood that even one false gesture could undo hours of delicate communication. The fleet's crew followed strict protocols: no unnecessary movement, no aggressive maneuvers, and constant readiness for rapid evacuation if needed. At the same time, scientists and rescue specialists began preparing strategies for immediate deployment. Hovercraft, drones, and environmental stabilization equipment were readied, with plans tailored to the planet's extreme conditions. The next step was daring but necessary. The fleet would attempt to assist directly in the most endangered areas. Using Lina's analysis of the SOS signals, they identified regions where populations were concentrated and environmental threats were highest. Rescue pods were prepared, equipped with protective shielding, emergency supplies, and advanced terraforming devices designed to stabilize local conditions. The Deathworlders observed silently as these preparations unfolded, still cautious but no longer hostile. It was clear that cooperation would be required if the mission was to succeed. As the first rescue operations began, The fleet and the Deathworlders worked in tandem, albeit tentatively. Hovercraft descended into canyons and valleys, evacuating inhabitants from collapsing structures and transporting them to safer zones. Drones stabilized sections of terrain threatened by volcanic activity, redirecting lava flows or reinforcing fragile surfaces. Communication was continuous, signals exchanged constantly to coordinate every movement. It was a tense and delicate operation, one that required absolute precision and trust on both sides. Despite careful planning, the danger remained immense. Unpredictable weather, unstable ground, and the Deathworlders' unfamiliar environment posed constant challenges. Every mission carried risk. Pilots, engineers, and rescue specialists had to adapt quickly, making real-time decisions that could mean life or death. Commander Voss coordinated from the flagship, monitoring each operation closely, while Lena Ortiz provided critical data analysis from Helios Station. Every successful rescue brought relief, but every obstacle reminded them of the peril that remained. Throughout this operation, the Deathworlders themselves proved invaluable. Their intimate knowledge of the terrain, environmental patterns, and social structures allowed the fleet to operate more efficiently. They guided rescue pods through narrow canyons, warned of unstable regions, and helped evacuate inhabitants who might otherwise have been lost. Slowly, barriers of mistrust began to fall. It became clear that the SOS had not been a trap, nor a test, but a genuine call for assistance. And as both sides worked together, mutual respect began to grow. By the end of the first full day of operations, significant progress had been made. Thousands of inhabitants had been relocated to safer areas, and environmental stabilization efforts had prevented immediate disasters in critical zones. The fleet had proven that it could operate under extreme conditions, and the Deathworlders had shown that, despite centuries of isolation and self-reliance, they could cooperate when survival demanded it. The combination of courage, technology, and intelligence had created a fragile but effective alliance. For Commander Voss, Lena Ortiz, and the fleet, it was a moment of cautious optimism. The mission was far from complete, but the breakthrough had been achieved. First contact had been made, trust had been established, and the SOS was finally being answered effectively. The Deathworlders, once seen as distant and potentially hostile, were now partners in the rescue operation, and though the danger remained, the collaboration marked a turning point, a chance to save lives and prove that even the most formidable civilizations could work together when necessity demanded it. The night fell over the Death, storms continuing to rage but now interspersed with the glow of rescue operations. Lights from the fleet and the Deathworlders' settlements mingled in a surreal display, signaling hope amid chaos. Lena Ortiz watched the SOS signals slowly stabilize, pulses becoming less frantic as initial evacuations succeeded. Commander Voss allowed himself a brief moment of relief, knowing that the first critical phase of the operation had been successful, and that this extraordinary moment would be remembered as the beginning of an unprecedented alliance. The fleet and the Deathworlders had achieved something extraordinary. Trust had been established, communication channels were stable, and initial rescue operations were underway. But the hardest part was still ahead. The Deathworld's environmental collapse was far from over. Volcanic eruptions continued to shake entire regions. Storms raged across plains and canyons, and the planet's surface remained unpredictable and deadly. Commander Tarek Voss knew that every decision from this point forward could save or cost thousands of lives. The fleet had to operate at peak efficiency, and the cooperation of the Deathworlders would be the key to success. Operations were coordinated meticulously. Lena Ortiz, from Helios Station, provided continuous updates, analyzing the SOS signals and environmental data in real time. She could see where lava flows threatened settlements, where the storms were intensifying, and which areas were most at risk of collapse. "Commander, Sector 5 is showing extreme activity," she said over the COM system. "If we don't act now, those inhabitants will be trapped." Voss immediately deployed specialized rescue pods to the region, supported by Deathworlder guides who knew every canyon, ridge, and natural hazard. The coordination was unprecedented, a delicate dance between alien knowledge and human technology. The rescue missions were perilous. Pilots maneuvered through lightning-charged storms, dodged falling debris, and navigated shifting terrain. Engineers on board worked tirelessly to stabilize the environmental equipment, deploying devices that could redirect lava flows, reinforce crumbling surfaces, and create temporary shelters for the inhabitants. Each operation required split-second decision-making, and mistakes could be fatal. Yet the crews persevered, fueled by the urgency of the SOS and the understanding that lives hung in the balance. The Deathworlders themselves were instrumental in the operation. Their intimate understanding of the planet's treacherous landscapes allowed the fleet to operate more efficiently. They warned of weak ground, identified safe landing zones, and guided rescue pods through narrow, twisting canyons. For centuries, these beings had survived unimaginable conditions, and now that knowledge became vital. At first, there had been fear and mistrust, but necessity had forged cooperation. Slowly, Respect and understanding grew between the two civilizations. Some of the most critical moments occurred in the planet's central regions, where entire settlements were threatened by volcanic eruptions and violent seismic activity. The SOS signals there were nearly constant, almost frantic in their intensity. Commander Voss prioritized these regions, sending combined teams of humans and Deathworlders to execute rapid evacuations. The process was chaotic, tense, and exhausting. Emergency shelters were set up, inhabitants were moved in coordinated waves, and drones stabilized areas that were on the verge of collapse. Every success was celebrated, but every failure reminded the teams of the stakes. Amid the chaos, remarkable acts of courage emerged. A young pilot named Rena Kaur risked her ship to rescue a group of inhabitants trapped near a collapsing cliff. Using skill and intuition, she navigated through lightning and rockfalls, managing to land her pod just in time. The inhabitants, though initially wary of the outsiders, expressed gratitude in ways that transcended language, gestures that communicated relief, trust, and hope. Stories like these spread quickly across the fleet, inspiring others to push forward despite the danger. The fleet's scientific teams also played a crucial role. Environmental specialists deployed devices designed to stabilize tectonic activity temporarily, reduce storm intensity, and reinforce areas where natural structures were failing. These tools, combined with Deathworlder knowledge of the terrain, allowed the rescue operations to proceed more safely. Drones monitored regions that were too dangerous for human or Deathworlder teams to enter, providing real-time data that informed every strategic decision. It was a delicate balance between speed and safety, risk and reward, but the combined effort steadily reduced the immediate threats. Meanwhile, Commander Voss worked tirelessly to maintain morale and focus. The operation was grueling, lasting days without pause, with crews rotating in shifts to manage exhaustion. He held frequent briefings, emphasizing teamwork, communication, and the importance of every action. "We are not just observers," he reminded the fleet. "We are partners. We are here to save lives, and together, we can do it." His words reinforced the sense of purpose that drove every officer, engineer, pilot, and scientist on the mission. Lena Ortiz continued to monitor the SOS signals and environmental changes, coordinating updates between Helios Station and the fleet. Her work was critical, ensuring that the fleet could anticipate changes in the planet's conditions and adjust operations accordingly. At times, the signals seemed to grow frantic, almost pleading, as if urging faster action. It was a constant reminder that the stakes were real, and that lives depended on every decision made in real-time. Gradually, the coordinated efforts began to show results. Populations were moved from the most dangerous regions to temporary safe zones, where food, water, and medical aid were provided. Lava flows were redirected, unstable structures reinforced, and areas prone to collapse stabilized. Each successful operation reduced the intensity of the SOS signals, evidence that the inhabitants were being saved and that the immediate threat was decreasing. Commander Voss allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction, knowing that the combined efforts of the fleet and the Deathworlders were making a tangible difference. However, challenges continued to arise. Unpredictable environmental shifts tested the fleet's adaptability. A sudden storm engulfed a previously stabilized region, forcing rapid redeployment of rescue teams. A minor volcanic eruption blocked access to a canyon where hundreds of inhabitants were awaiting evacuation. In every instance, the crews had to think quickly, combining human ingenuity with Deathworlder knowledge to solve problems on the fly. The operation demanded constant vigilance, adaptability, and courage, yet every obstacle overcome reinforced the growing trust between the two civilizations. As the operation progressed, communication and coordination improved remarkably. The Deathworlders, initially cautious and wary, began actively participating in planning and executing rescue missions. They suggested routes, shared warnings about dangerous terrain, and even assisted in stabilizing equipment. For the fleet's human crew, this collaboration was both inspiring and reassuring. It became evident that, despite centuries of isolation and survivalist instincts, the Deathworlders could cooperate when necessity demanded it. A fragile but powerful alliance was forming, built on mutual respect, trust, and the shared goal of saving lives. One of the most dramatic moments occurred when a massive volcanic eruption threatened a densely populated settlement. The fleet deployed multiple rescue pods simultaneously, while Deathworlder guides directed inhabitants to emergency shelters. Engineering teams activated environmental stabilization devices, diverting lava flows and reinforcing weakened ground. Pilots navigated through smoke, fire, and debris, executing daring maneuvers to reach the most vulnerable groups. It was a test of skill, coordination, and bravery. By the end of the operation, the settlement had been evacuated successfully, a triumph that showcased the power of collaboration and determination. As days passed, more and more inhabitants were rescued, and the intensity of the SOS signals gradually decreased. The planet was far from fully stabilized, but the immediate threats had been mitigated. Temporary shelters were in place, emergency food and water supplied, and environmental stabilization devices maintained critical areas. Commander Voss and Lena Ortiz monitored the progress closely, coordinating efforts to ensure that no region was overlooked. The combined efforts of the fleet and the Deathworlders had turned a desperate situation into a manageable one, proving that cooperation could overcome even the harshest conditions. The success of the operation also had profound implications beyond the immediate rescue. Across the galaxy, news of the collaboration spread quickly. Species that had previously considered Deathworld dangerous or unapproachable began to reconsider their assumptions. The event became a symbol of what could be achieved when fear was set aside in favor of trust and cooperation. Commander Voss reflected on this as he watched the final evacuation efforts, realizing that the mission had not only saved lives but also rewritten perceptions of an entire civilization. By the final phase of operations, the fleet and the Deathworlders had created a coordinated system for managing the planet's crises. Emergency response protocols were established, temporary shelters secured, and communication networks strengthened to ensure that future threats could be addressed more efficiently. The SOS signals, once frantic and desperate, had slowed to regular pulses, a sign that the immediate danger had passed. The planet was still dangerous, but now its inhabitants had allies they could rely on in moments of crisis. The human crew and the Deathworlders shared a rare moment of reflection and relief. They had faced extreme danger, unpredictable environments, and the uncertainty of first contact. Yet, through collaboration, determination, and courage, they had achieved what seemed impossible. Lives had been saved, trust had been built, and a lasting bond had been forged between two civilizations that had never interacted before. Commander Voss allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, knowing that the fleet had fulfilled its mission and that the SOS had been answered in full. As the fleet prepared to depart, the Deathworlders gathered to express gratitude in ways that transcended language. Energy pulses, gestures, and coordinated signals communicated appreciation, respect, and recognition. It was a poignant moment, a silent acknowledgement that this extraordinary operation had not only saved lives, but also bridged the gap between two very different civilizations. Lena Ortiz watched the signals, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. She had been part of a mission that would be remembered for generations, a mission that demonstrated the power of courage, intelligence, and cooperation. The departure of the fleet was bittersweet. The mission had been a success, but the planet remained a harsh, dangerous world. The inhabitants had survived the immediate disaster, but the long-term recovery would be their responsibility. Still, the event had changed everything. For the first time, Deathworlders had worked alongside outsiders, had trusted help when it mattered most, and had seen that cooperation could overcome even the most extreme challenges. Commander Voss, Lena Ortiz, and the fleet had proven that even in the most dangerous corners of the galaxy, hope, determination, and trust could make a difference. As the fleet left orbit, the SOS signals faded, replaced by regular transmissions indicating stability. Lena Ortiz allowed herself a moment to breathe, reflecting on the journey that had begun with a single, desperate call for help. The Deathworlders, once considered distant and almost mythical, were now partners, survivors who had shown resilience, intelligence, and the capacity for trust. Across the galaxy, the story of the rescue would become legendary, a testament to the power of courage, collaboration, and humanity, both human and alien. The fleet continued its journey back, carrying not only the satisfaction of a mission accomplished, but also the knowledge that life, even in its most extreme forms, could be saved when compassion, strategy, and courage came together. The SOS had been answered, and the Deathworlders had survived, stronger and wiser for the experience. And as stars stretched into the distance, Lena Ortiz, Commander Voss, and the fleet understood that this mission was not just a rest, was a turning point, a story that would inspire generations across the galaxy.